Great. So first, before we get into some of his deflections, I want to get your response to his initial tweet, the one that sparked this firestorm. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think that the concept that he was pointing out, that people feel the need to fake their race on college application forms, tells you everything you need to know about the anti-racist project in America more broadly. The truth is that we don't live in a racist country anymore. In fact, we live in a country that is so minimally racist that it is actively in the interests of the plurality or majority population to pretend as if they're a racial minority because they know that there's an entire set of perks and benefits that come with it. As an Asian American, I'm very familiar with how the college admission system is very much rigged against whites and Asians, and I think that this data shows that to be very clear. Now, when it comes to Mr. Kendi's issue with it, he thinks that this is false honor, that these white students are taking on the benefits that belong to racial minorities in the ideal society that he wants to create. But I think it does a very good job of pointing out just how fake, just how fraudulent the world that Ibram Kendi wants to create would actually look like if it were to be implemented, Department of Anti-Racism and all.
So what do you make of some of his responses to the criticism that he's been getting? He's been getting waves and waves of it. One that comes immediately to mind is my former colleague, Jack Posobiec, who joked that he, quote unquote, broke Kendi. And of course, then Kendi tried to make that into some, he stretched it as far as you can go to make it into some weird slavery throwback. And he went on and on about how, the white man used to say and be proud of breaking the black man. He went into that whole tangent. And so, of course, he doesn't want to speak head on and argue about the actual points being made. He, of course, tries to cover up everything with racism. It's a common tactic. We all know this from the left. So what do you make of some of his responses to the criticism?
Well, I think this is a classic leftist tactic, right? Because they don't actually have to hold themselves to the account of making good arguments. They don't have to hold themselves to the account of being correct about anything. They recognize that the worst thing you can be called in modern American life is a racist. Now, I think racism is bad, but I think there's a lot of things that are a lot worse than being a racist. I think that if you steal from people, if you kill people, that makes you a worse person than being a racist. Unfortunately, in modern American life, Democrats seek to decriminalize all of those things and create an entire criminal code around being racist. And so why would Ibram Kendi jump to an accusation like we're being that Jack was being racist when he decided to say that he broke Ibram Kendi? Because he knows that that's the moment, if the racism accusation sticks, that the argument is over. You've painted the other person as a bad person, and no other justification has to be made. It also is probably useful because Ibram Kendi is one of the greatest frauds in American life. He's not particularly bright. His scholarship doesn't stand up to any scrutiny, and his writing sucks too. And so I think that it was ultimately an easy out for him just to claim that, again, those evil, racist white supremacists who have the audacity to point out the incoherence of his arguments came and they were being racist to him, and that's why they were criticizing him.
And do you think in some ways this kind of shows this idea that I've always grown up with, being told that this is the marketplace of ideas and that we as conservatives, we have the better ideas, and that's why we like to debate so much, and that's why leftists like to hide from it. But that's almost an antiquated notion because, Kenny's just the latest example of this. They don't want to debate. It's not about finding the truth necessarily. It's about finding cudgels to beat over the heads of their opponents to get what they want. That's really what we're facing right now. So do you think it's almost antiquated to think that perhaps if we just have better arguments in the left, that we're going to win this thing, and that perhaps we may need to perhaps upgrade our thinking on this?
Absolutely. Another great example of this is the 1619 project pioneered by Nicole Hannah-Jones, right? I see conservatives all the time. They love to bring up that even the World Socialist Congress or some organization like that said that the scholarship and the history that she was basing her entire project on was faulty. And oh no, we've won in the marketplace of ideas. This is incorrect. And yet, the 1619 Project, How to Be an Anti-Racist, all of this stuff is being mainlined directly into the schools where most American children are educated, private and public. Turns out that winning in the marketplace of ideas isn't good enough when the left owns the entire bazaar. They own the entire environment where decisions are made, where truth is adjudicated, and where reality is created. And so rather than constantly trying to call out leftist hypocrisy, which I know can be a lot of fun to do, conservatives should start to realize that actually what matters is power. And right now, we have very little power in American life. We've lost all of the cultural institutions, we've lost most of corporate America, and we've lost government. And really, the only thing that we're good at occasionally winning is government. We can occasionally win the White House, we can occasionally win Congress. And so I've been advocating for years now that conservatives should really use that power, use the one lever of power that they have in order to defend the interest of their people. Because at this point, we can yell and write articles, write op-eds, write tweets all the live long day about how, the leftists are hypocrites. But guess what? Because of the hierarchy in American life, it doesn't matter. They'll still win regardless.
That's exactly right. I'm so glad you brought up that point there. And it's one thing that I feel like I'm just, running my head into the same wall, because I feel like we keep doing the same cycle. We keep doing the same cycle over and over and over. And of course, while we're all sitting here still talking and pointing out ideas, the left, they just keep moving the field farther and farther to the left. And of course, we need to kind of play that game a little bit as well. And one idea that I keep coming back to is those leftists in power. Do you have an opinion on this? Do you think that a lot of these are grifters, as the term you may be called, or do you think they're radical ideologues? Or do you think it doesn't really matter which way it goes?
I don't think it really matters much to the left whether they're grifters or radical ideologues, because the one thing that the left is always good at is they never punch left. Remember, Kamala Harris was able to post a bail fund for rioters that burned and killed people in American cities last year. And Kamala Harris is very much a centrist within the Democratic Party. The far left really doesn't like her very much because they know that she's really an opportunist. But what they'll never do is punch to the left of them. Meanwhile, on the right, we're constantly looking for excuses to gatekeep, to say that, oh, this person, they're insufficiently pure as a conservative, or maybe they said something naughty, or maybe they said something inopportune. We're constantly infighting. We're constantly focused inward, as opposed to engaging the march that's required to actually move the center of American life more in our direction. The thing that most conservatives tend to do is that anything to the left of me is a good faith disagreement that I must acknowledge and contend with, and anything to the right of me is literally Hitler. Well, guess what? If you're the furthest right in American politics and you think that's the only acceptable thing, then the center is never going to move your way. I think that it's time that conservatives got a little bit more circumspect about constantly punching their own side and recognize that they need whatever allies they can get, because the left has marched on leftward for generations, and whatever the good old-fashioned liberal that you had disagreements with back in the day pushed, their intellectual or maybe literal descendants are going to push things far to the left of that, and their descendants will push things far to the left of that, and that's just the way things go.
It is, and then sadly, you see the mainstream Republican, I guess you could call it the corporate Republican Party, the rhinos, whatever you want to call them. It seems like they are debating and asking for right now what Democrats were 10 years ago. I mean, you can hear George W. Bush. I mean, he used to be called Hitler all the time, and we stood by him. And now all of a sudden he comes out of the shadows to be buddies with the Obamas, and to call the rest of us, like you and I, to call us nativists and bad people for our stances when it comes to immigration and our conception of a nation. So you're exactly right. You're exactly spot on this front. And looking at Kendi and some of his ideas that his ideas are all over our schools. I mean, his books can be found in school libraries. Some teachers even assign them. Of course, we know it at the college level, but also K through 12, we're seeing this. And of course, now we're seeing kids who are white are thinking they're born evil, and then kids who are non-white thinking that they're born disadvantaged and victimized, and that they can't make it in this society without big government coming in to help them. It's extremely dangerous. And of course, that's been the focal point of what the Virginia gubernatorial race has been all about. So how dangerous is it, do you think, for the next generation of Americans to be coming up and being raised on the ideas spouted by people like Kendi?
I think that it's extremely dangerous, and it's not what any serious country would let happen to their young people. We know every civilization across time has known that if you own a nation's children, you own that nation's future. And so what the far left is doing by pushing this sort of racial animus in our elementary, middle, high schools, even colleges, is ensuring that their worldview, even if it gets debunked by the latest conservative fact-checking site, will ultimately win in the end, because we're raising up an entire generation of young people in the United States who either, if they're white or some other so-called dominant racial groups, are going to hate themselves, and if they're a minority, to victimize themselves. People aren't taught to love their country in the way that they once were. They're not taught to love their fellow countrymen, and that's one hop and a skip away from destroying anything that looks like America, even though it might be called that in 20 to 30 years.
I know even some people that I know on the right, other Republicans and conservatives, I mean, there's so many different leftist notions that they've just taken in, because it's really in the air and the water that we breathe and we drink. It's really everywhere. We've been growing up as young people in a world, in a society dominated by the left. So I'll be talking either even to other young conservatives, and they'll make concessions to the left saying, well, you know, it is true that racism or slavery is America's original sin. And I'm like, no, no, no. Original sin is America's original sin because it's all of mankind's original sin. And so you just go from there, but you see these ideas. In many ways, I feel like we give the left the playing field. And then, of course, then we see that's why we keep losing. And so, of course, right now, as we're speaking, there's the national conservatism. There's a conference going on right now with a lot of big name people on the right. You have senators like Senator Josh Hawley and other politicians, Senator Ted Cruz. You have big name conservatives, many of whom who thankfully have been on this show, Michael Knowles and others. And of course, they're debating where does the right go from here? Because for so long, we've been defined as just anti what the left's doing. We're just the party of no in many ways. And of course, you and I, we know that's not necessarily true, but to the public, that's the idea they kind of get from us. And so we're trying to reshape ourselves as the party of here's our vision. So with that in mind, what vision do you think as conservatives should be telling the public that this is our vision for the future?
Well, I'm at the National Conservatism Conference right now, and I can tell you that there's a lot of really great ideas that are being presented here, and it goes to a lot of the vision concept that I've been advocating for a long time as well. Look, strong families, that's the core of any agenda of nationalism, of restoration, of conservatism, making sure that Americans are getting married, having kids, having them young, because if you don't have children, you don't have a country. Issues of sovereignty, making a critical eye towards our foreign policy, both to the sands of the Middle East, where we've devoted all of our resources for the past 30 years, maybe drawing that down, and taking a more critical eye to China and all of the threats that we face from them, specifically as it relates to our supply chains and so on. And then also looking to kind of broad-based prosperity. The Republican Party and the conservative movement for the last 30 years have been the party of corporate America. They have never seen a corporate tax cut they didn't like. They've never seen a tax cut for billionaires they didn't like. And look, we did have extortionate taxation at some point. Having, a low to medium taxes is important so that America stays competitive. But I'll tell you what, I think that there is very little appetite among national conservatives, among just regular, ordinary patriots anymore for yet another corporate tax cut. So I think a lot of these ideas are being hashed out at the National Conservatism Conference. And I think that the core of that vision is how do we create America where decent, ordinary people are able to send their kids to public-facing institutions that don't teach them to hate their country, are able to raise them in prosperous communities, and ensure that they'll live in an America that's worth living in. That's the core of the vision, and that's hopefully what this conference and all the organizations, initiatives, and people, including the people you have on your show every day, are building towards for the 21st century.
Saurabh, I love it so much, and I love these debates that we're really getting down to the true issues so that we can have a good guidepost for the future and where we are actually heading toward, because it's not over the cliff with the left and the corporate Republicans. We're heading in hopefully a good and new and faith-based direction. Saurabh, thanks so much for joining us tonight, and have fun at NatCon.
Thank you for having me, Kara.